Hello everyone, my name is Harold Campos and I am a Principal Program Manager in Azure Integration Services for Microsoft Corporation. Today I will be speaking about enabling SNA applications with Azure Integration Services. The agenda for this presentation is why integrating with SNA applications. We're going to talk about what is an SNA application and why is it important to integrate with them. What is the difference between TCP, IP, and SNA? Enabling SNA over IP in Azure, and we will also do a short demonstration of how to set up an SNA gateway. So the question is why integrating with SNA applications? There was a time where SNA was the primary networking method. SNA is an IBM networking architecture used by mainframes and mid-ranges for data exchange. So then, as such, it's many applications, CICS and IMS mostly, were created as core mission critical applications in banks, government institutions, and etc. Now, what is important to mention is that SNA is a fairly deterministic architecture. So it has a hierarchical method of definition. So you pretty much have to define everything: bandwidth, connections, and users. All of them, they have to be predefined. So that makes it very efficient as well. Customers have been using these SNA APIs for years and to build transaction-oriented programs. And one of the challenges that exists today is that even though the networking, the SNA, the devices that support the networking for SNA is gone because now we have SNA over IP that was introduced by IBM to preserve the investments in SNA. These applications remain, and there is a need for integrating with these applications. It is estimated that more than $20 trillion were invested in SNA applications in over 40,000 enterprises worldwide when SNA was the primary communications method of enterprises, right? Networking access method. So then, if we take this into account, it becomes even more relevant to find ways to connect with architectures that still rely on SNA systems. Now we're going to talk a little bit about some core concepts of SNA. I will be providing a link later where you can use to learn more about what it is, because there is a lot of theory behind SNA. So we don't plan to cover the whole SNA theory here. We just cover some general concepts that will allow us to get into the actual explanation on how to connect with these environments using the Microsoft products. There is a concept of a physical unit that is basically you can think of a device. It represents a device like a mainframe, like a host integration server. Right. For instance, there is a PU5 for physical unit number 5, which is type 5, which is a mainframe. There is a PU 2.1, which is the host integration server, or a server that connects and understand what the SNA formats are. There is also the concept of logical units. End users and applications access SNA networks through logical units. They are entry points through which users and applications access the SNA network, and they are of different types. So if the physical units represent devices like hardware, right, and we think that logical units represent applications, so then there are different types of logical units that are needed depending on the context for the integration. For instance, we have type 1, type 2, type 3, and type 6.2. Some of these types cover screen-based interactions, some other printing interactions, because in the past mainframes they manage the printers as well, so you have them connected to mainframes. And there is also the ones that support application exchanges, like the type 6.2, which is the type that we will be mostly speaking about in further slides. And there is also the Systems and Services Control Point, or SSEP, which is basically like a referee. It activates controls and deactivates network resources in the network, right? So then you have the devices, the physical units, you have the logical units or elements that represents applications, and then you have the SSEP. Okay, three main concepts in relevant for SNA. Now, as I was mentioning in the LUs, we have what do we actually call typical SNA applications? I'm sure that you are familiar with the green screens applications, which we call 3270 based applications. These applications, they communicate via screens, so they have what we call maps, and these maps, they receive information, they can involve programs behind the scenes, and they get a response back, and then you can define a sequence of screens to achieve a specific goal. And there is also the application to application, which is basically the ability that have applications to interact with other applications. Think of when you use your cell phone to query a balance, to get your account balance from your bank, right? It's likely that there is a CICS or an IMS program running on the mainframe that has the business logic and is interacting with a legacy database as well, where your banking information is stored. So then when you access this particular application in mainframe, you do it via using this mechanism for application to application communication. There is a concept of independent and dependent sessions. We will, to summarize, the dependent sessions, they require an activation from the host. In other words, as all of these sessions are connected to the host can determine which session is active or inactive, right? And it can manage the arbitration of this LU to LU session. In the case of independent sessions, this is fairly different. So they are not, they don't require the SSEP to manage them. They can be parallel, right? And they can be performed directly by the PU 2.1 node, which is like a host integration server or any other SNA client. For example, as I said, the transaction to query an account balance, right? You can have thousands of them in parallel, right? You don't have to define them, each of them, and they won't have, or millions, right? And they don't have to be arbitrated by the SSEP. There is a when SNA was originally defined, it didn't include a way to allow communication across programs, right? So then they came with this. They came back with this. They added this sophisticated feature called Advanced Program to Program Communication, or APPC. What you see in the graphic here is you see two transaction programs, right? So there is a transaction program here in the host, a mainframe or a mid-range, and there is the representation of this transaction program in host integration server in the other end of the Windows world, or the non mainframe slash mid-ranges world, right, or the cloud world, if you will. So then you will be requiring LU's definitions for the entry point and for the target destination, so to speak, and a mode for connecting using LU 6.2. To summarize, APPC is an implementation of the SNA architecture on a given system and allows interconnected systems to communicate and share the processing of programs. So then, getting into the actual terminology of APPC programs, as I said, there are different types of LUs, and the one that covers application to application interaction is the LU 6.2. You have to define a local LU, which is associated with the host integration server. You have to define a remote or partner LU, which is associated with the remote system. This is the mainframe. And you have to have a TP name, or a transaction program name, which is the program that you will be calling on behalf from the client, right? So, for instance, there is a program that is called pgetb, program get balance, right? pgb1, something like that, right? So that is the program that will be conducting the business logic on the mainframe. There is a mode name that coincides with the set of session properties to be used by the APPC LUs. Now, we've been speaking a lot about the IBM SNA architecture, APPC, PUs, LUs, SSEPs. Right now, we're going to get into how is it that we play from the Azure cloud to these legacy systems. We have for about 30 years, we've had this host integration server product that allows allowed connectivity between the mainframes and mid-ranges with Windows servers, right? So this product is still available to install on Azure virtual machines, and it requires a BizTalk server license. So you acquire a BizTalk server license, and then you get the rights of using this product, host integration server. And what we've been doing as well over the last 4 years is we've been introducing all of these the core technologies that we have for integration in host integration server into Azure Integration Services via Azure Logic Apps connectors. So in other words, we're giving our customers a chance not only to connect on premises or with as they've been doing for the last 30 years with host integration server, but we are including core capabilities to the Logic Apps product. So then it allows this direct integration with legacy systems or via host integration server, which is something that we're going to be talking about very soon. What is the difference between host integration server and Azure integration service? How do I pick? What are the scenarios that where I know that Logic Apps has connectors for, and which scenarios I require host integration server for? Azure Logic Apps connectors integrate with Mainframe and Midranges directly using TCP/IP. Let's remember, SNA over IP is an implementation. In the end, it's a capability that allows SNA APIs to talk to each other on an TCP/IP network. So what we've done is we've included our core capabilities of host integration server into Azure Logic Apps connectors. So then you don't need to go to SNA to go to a mainframe. You just use TCP/IP information, the information of the mainframe, the prompts that you need to interact with, or the credentials and other information, and then you are ready to integrate with the mainframe via TCP/IP. Azure Logic Apps can consume REST services that can consume host integration server libraries when interacting with SNA applications. So what happens is that many of them. So then this is where host integration comes to play, right? Host integration server acts as an SNA server for Azure Integration Services. Azure Logic Apps can consume REST services exposing HIS libraries. When is SNA required? Typically in scenarios where you have to face commit, right? There is no eventual consistency in getting a withdrawal or you're making a deposit or a payment, right? So you have to, in this particular case, you will be governed by this two-phase commit paradigm, native SNA APIs-based applications. You need direct vSAM access. Or you need to access print services. So in those cases, you need pretty much SNA or SNA over IP, right? Or SNA over IP, or you will be interacting with SNA APIs or SNA capabilities to some degree. So then what Logic Apps does is Logic Apps can do that work through an host integration server that is implemented in a virtual machine in the cloud, the same as you would on premises, because Logic Apps can run also in containers on premises. Now, let's talk a little bit about SNA over IP in Azure requirements. The first requirement to enable SNA over IP is to enable it on the mainframe or on the mid-range. You have to deploy a number of steps called the IBM Enterprise Extender that has been available since, I think, 1998, right? Which will basically allow allow SNA to use the TCP/IP network, UDP actually for prioritization because it's faster, and TCP/IP because it's reliable, right? Azure Express Route, so you need a private connection to the mainframe mid-range data center from your subscription. You need UDP ports open 12,000 through 12,004, the traffic to allow the enterprise extender traffic or IPDLC or SNA over IP traffic between the two environments. You will be needing a host integration server environment or in an Azure VM and enable the HIS firewall rules because we have a number of rules to enable the communication, and configure an SNA gateway in the HIS VM. Now, This is how it typically looks an enterprise that uses legacy systems as a part of the mission critical operations. So you have a mainframe here, you have a mid range as well, or like for instance, an AS400, what is new in this 400 system, right? They have all of these components in here, right? VTAM, and they have the enterprise extender in both cases deployed, right? And then this is the tier where you have host integration server and the associated servers, right? Now that is on premises, right? And so then this is on premises, but if you are planning to extend your workloads to the cloud and you do need to leverage SNA over IP, so then you have to include host integration server in a VM, so then you can work with Logic Apps or with any other Azure Integration Services, or containers, or AKS, or whatever you are using as a cloud native solutions. So then you can provide that level of integration between the mainframe and mid ranges to this cloud world. So then in this case, you are extending your capabilities. You're extending the reach of the mainframe legacy applications to the cloud. Now we're going to take a look to a short demo on how to configure an HIS SNA Gateway in Azure. So what I've done is I have a couple of VMs. So I have set up one in Azure, and I have one on premises. Let me show you what I have. Let's see. Let's log on. Okay. So just bear with me for a second. Okay, so this is my environment. So I have a VM that is called HCAMPOS 001, which is running in Windows Server 2022 data center. So this is located in a subscription that has access to an express route that is connecting us to our mainframe that we have in Redmond. So then if I join to this machine, if I go to this machine here, this is the machine. Let me show you. Um, So it's what I've done last night is I've run the setup of host integration server. So what I did is I have the setup which I downloaded from a location, right? And then once it's asking me for change, repair, or remove, right? So what I did is I just went through the process of installing the the software. But the next step for after this was installed is to go ahead and to configure the product, right? So then if you see here, when you install the host integration server product, you will have all of these features and capabilities available. But the first step that you have to follow is the configuration step. You have to configure the product because at this point you just have the libraries available and the product installed, but it hasn't been configured, right? So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and configure the product and then configure the SNA Gateway and explain the steps that I'm taking. These are the core services that I need to set up. First of all, I have to enable the common settings. Two local groups are created on the server to allow tasks to be executed via runtime or via admin, right? So in this particular case, I'm going to add myself to run all of these services. Yes, I'm an admin here. Yes, I know. Network integration. And this is a key part here, right? So I have to click here, enable network integration, and I have to come up with an SNA subdomain here. So this is in host integration server, in the host integration server world, but not SNA, host integration server world. You have to come up with a subdomain, which is like a way to group servers and provide high availability and fault tolerance, right? So then if I create this subdomain sub sure uh, so sure, subdomain Azure. Right, so then I have my subdomain, and I can enable as many services as I want. Here, these LU 6.2 RESync services are the services required for integrating with two-phase commit. We were using two-phase commit. I can enable data integration as well if I want to use the RDA service, which is something that I will be showing you later. Also, the application integration feature, session integrator for screen exchanges, and message integration. But for now, I will just set up the SNA Gateway or network integration capabilities, right? Okay, so then I'll do apply configuration to make things faster. And then after that, it should be setting up the SNA Manager soon. And then in the meantime, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open another session with another server that is ready. This is a different one. Okay, so let me show you now where we are at with the installation of the SNA Gateway. So then starting service is done. It installed everything. So we close this screen, and then we go to the SNA Manager. In the SNA Manager, this is where we are going to be defining the LUs and all of that theory that I just explained about. Okay. The Microsoft SNA Manager console allows you to manage entire subdomains here, right? So I have my subdomain, the subdomain that subdomain Azure that I created. I have the server that is called HCampus 001, right? And then if you remember, SNA over IP will be requiring a specific connectivity with the host. So then in link services here, what I do is I will be creating a link service that is called IPDLC link service, right? And then I will be pointing to, in this case, our mainframe. Our mainframe is called sys1. Here, I'll just leave the rest in by default, right? The network name is MSFT. In here, I'm going to call it, say, nodex. I'm going to say that this is dynamic PU definition. This is something that, by the way, folks, this is something that is you will be needing help from the mainframe admin. Okay, this is something that you don't need to worry about, right? So you just ask the information, and the mainframe specialist, they will provide it for you. Like, for instance, what's the network name and things like that, right? So then by doing this, I'm making sure that this SNA over IP service is installed, is created. Now I save the configuration, I go to connections, and then I create a new IPLDLC connection that is called SNA connection con 01 0x, right? And then I pick up the service SNA IP 1 peer system, because peer system is a type of communication of independent communication that require interaction between applications directly. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a local LU here. Let's call L like camp 200. The network is MSFT. Okay, and then I'm going to save the configuration. Every time that I run a step, folks, you have to be extra careful, so you just save the configuration. And then in here, I'm going to be using this remote LU alias. Remember, there is a conversation for an APPC conversation to occur. There has to be three elements: the local LU, the remote LU, and the mode. So far, I've been able to specify the local and remote LUs. I'm going to save the configuration, and I'll show you where the modes are. If you see this box here, I have all of these modes defined. And in my mainframe, I'm using this PA62TKNU mode, right? That has characteristics about the transactions and information relevant for the SNA exchange of data. So then now I go and I try to activate the SNA service, right? So something that you have to be very careful of is that when you activate and you have not enabled the firewall rules, so then your connection will likely fail. So then you gotta go to the firewall. Hold on, after firewall. And then you will look for host integration server. You enable it, hit OK, right? So it has failed, as you see, right? So then what I can do is I can try restarting the service. So then to see if this time the connection is successful. So what's going to happen is that the connection will inquire for the link service, in this case the IPDLC service that connects to the host via SNA over IP, right? And then hopefully the connection will be active. Now I have the connection active. So the next step for me is to go to the diagnostics tool and then see if I can run an APPC test with the information of the three values, right? The local LU, the remote LU, the mode, and the server information. So then hopefully this session will be activated and it says that the allocate has been succeeded. So then now we are officially connected to the mainframe. There are a number of ways to validate how this had work, right? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just give me a second. I'm going to go to my second VM, right? Where and point you to where is it that you can look at these things, right? So if I go to the mainframe and and I enter um, to see what has happened in the mainframe. So then I'll see that I'll get to ISPF, and in ISPF, um, I'll take a look to the log, right? And in the log, what I can do is I can run the just 1 second. Copy paste. I think it's gonna be faster if I do it that way. I'm going to see if I have the LU. It was the LU HCAM 200. Okay, I'm running out of time, so I'll make sure that this is quick. So then hopefully let's see. So when I see this command, right, it says display accepted. So then I go and I look for what had happened, right? Where is if the display was accepted, and then you can see you have the LU here, right? LHCAM 200, and you have the node that established the session, which was SNA node X, and in the network mainframe network MSFT, and sys1. So now I'm gonna go back to the presentation, right? To just to show you what is it that we have as a next steps, right? So just to take away, so Host Integration Server provides SNA over IP communications in Azure to allow integration between SNA APIs and AIS. Azure Logic Apps connectors provide direct TCP/IP communication to mainframes when SNA is not required. Please stay tuned for videos showing how to use Azure Integration Services to interact with vSAN files online and offline with the managed provider that we have with Host Integration Server and with our Logic Apps connectors. 3270 programs with Logic Apps connectors, DB2 programs with our Logic App connector for DB2, CICS, IMS, and IBM MQ systems. And I want to thank you for your time. I hope you had enjoyed this presentation. I will be providing more links and relevant information in the um, in the information that is linked to the video. Thank you, everyone.